Catherine de Medici, the orphan who ruled France and shaped history. Welcome to Bytes, where history comes alive one story at a time. Today, we're diving into the remarkable life of a woman who rose from tragedy and political chaos to become one of the most influential figures of her era, Catherine de Medici. Stay tuned for a journey through intrigue, resilience, and power. Catherine de Medici's story begins in the heart of Renaissance Florence. On April 13, 1519, the city was a masterpiece of art and ambition, where the Medici family reigned supreme, not kings, not emperors, but rulers of influence, wealth, and secrets. Her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, came from French nobility, her lineage glittering with ties to Europe's most powerful families. Her father, Lorenzo de' Medici, was Duke of Urbino and the ruler of Florence. Together they represented a union of Italian cunning and French aristocracy, forged in the fires of politics and strategy. But fate had other plans. Catherine's birth was celebrated with hope and grandeur, but it came at a terrible cost. Only a few days after welcoming their daughter into the world, Madeleine fell gravely ill. Was it the plague? Puerperal fever? No one could say for certain. On April 28, 1519, she was gone, and just 21 days later, her father followed. Lorenzo, too, succumbed to sickness, leaving behind an infant daughter and an empire teetering on the brink of chaos. Imagine, a newborn baby, barely a month old, suddenly the last hope of the mighty Medici dynasty. Now orphaned, Catherine was alone, yet not forgotten. The Medicis were no strangers to power plays. She was sent to live among relatives, moving from one guardian to another, each with their own motives, their own ambitions. Her paternal grandmother, Alfonsina Orsini, took her in first. When Alfonsina passed, it was Catherine's aunt, Clarice de Medici, who raised her alongside her cousins. The shadow of loss hung over her childhood, but it was also filled with opportunity. Raised as a Roman Catholic, Catherine received an education fit for a queen. Quite literally. She learned to speak not just Italian but French and Latin. She was groomed to charm, to think, to rule. The Medici name still carried weight despite the family's declining fortunes. Pope Leo X, Catherine's great-uncle, sought to use her as a pawn in his political chessboard, even naming her Duchess of Urbino. But titles, wealth, and power were fragile in Renaissance Italy. The duchy was soon stripped away, leaving Catherine with a noble name, but little else. Her story was only just beginning. From the gilded halls of Florence to the cutthroat courts of Europe, Catherine de Medici would rise. But how did an orphan with so many odds stacked against her become a queen who shaped history? Stay with us. The journey has just begun. Catherine's life began with a heartbreak that could have shattered even the strongest of spirits. Born on a spring day in 1519, her arrival in the world was a bittersweet celebration. Her parents, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne and Lorenzo de' Medici, were overjoyed. Together they represented a powerful alliance of French nobility and Florentine ambition, a union crafted not just out of love, but to shape the political future of Europe. But joy turned to sorrow faster than anyone could have imagined. Only days after Catherine's birth, her mother fell gravely ill. Some whispered of plague, others suspected the ravages of childbirth. By the end of April, Madeleine was gone. Her father, Lorenzo, was devastated, but grief didn't spare him for long. Just 3 weeks later, Lorenzo too fell to illness. Whether it was syphilis, as some suspected, or another affliction, no one could save him. By early May, Catherine was alone in the world. Picture this, an infant too young to understand loss, born into one of the most powerful families in Florence, but left parentless in mere weeks. The future looked uncertain, her fate tied to the volatile web of politics and ambition that had both elevated and endangered her family. The Medici name was still a symbol of power, but Catherine's inheritance was far from secure. Florence itself was a city simmering with unrest, and the Medici family's control was fragile. To survive, Catherine would need more than just her name. She would need resilience, intelligence, and a sharp instinct for survival. Her early years were spent in the care of various relatives, each with their own schemes and priorities. First, her paternal grandmother, Alfonsina Orsini, took charge. Alfonsina, a woman of strong will and sharp mind, sought to shape Catherine into a symbol of Medici strength. But even Alfonsina couldn't protect her granddaughter for long. When Alfonsina passed away in 1520, Catherine was moved once again, this time to her aunt, Clarice de Medici. Clarice's home was a bustling center of Medici activity, filled with cousins and family members who were deeply entwined in Florence's political landscape. Here, Catherine was exposed to the intricate dance of diplomacy, power plays, and survival. Even as a child, she must have sensed the tension that surrounded her family, the delicate balance between wealth, influence, and the constant threat of losing it all. Florence itself was a city of contradictions, a place of unmatched beauty and cultural brilliance, yet also a hotbed of intrigue and danger. The Medicis were the stewards of the Renaissance, patrons of art and learning, but their position was anything but secure. Political rivalries and the ambitions of their enemies meant that Catherine's childhood, while privileged in many ways, was overshadowed by uncertainty. Despite the instability, Catherine thrived. She was given a first-rate education, one that emphasized not only languages and etiquette, but also critical thinking and adaptability. Her lessons weren't confined to books. Every whispered conversation, every glance exchanged in the grand halls of Medici estates was a lesson in survival. Even at a young age, Catherine was learning the skills that would define her future: resilience, adaptability, and the ability to navigate a world that could shift beneath her feet at any moment. Florence might have been her cradle, but it was also her battlefield, and though she didn't know it yet, these early experiences were shaping her into a woman who would one day wield power with unmatched skill. As the sun set on her childhood in Florence, Catherine's journey was only just beginning. The challenges ahead would be immense, but the foundations of her strength were already in place. Stay with us as we explore how this orphaned child would rise to become one of the most powerful figures in Europe. Catherine's life, even as a child, was never her own. She was born into a family that had mastered the art of power, strategic marriages, calculated alliances, and an unrelenting focus on maintaining their dominance. For the Medici, Catherine was more than just a little girl. She was a key piece on the chessboard of European politics. After her parents' deaths, Catherine was named Duchess of Urbino. The title carried weight, but it was more symbolic than practical. The duchy itself had been annexed by the Papal States, leaving her claim to the land tenuous at best. Still, the title served a purpose. It gave Catherine an identity tied to nobility, something the Medici family desperately needed to reinforce their waning influence. The people of Florence, however, didn't forget her claim. They called her Duchessina, the Little Duchess. It was both an endearment and a reminder of what had been lost. To her family, Catherine's title wasn't just a nod to the past, it was a beacon of hope for their future. But hope wasn't enough to protect her from the reality of her position. Catherine was still a pawn in a dangerous game. Her great-uncle, Pope Leo X, had grand plans for her. He sought to use her marriage to strengthen alliances, ensure Medici influence in Florence, and counter threats from rivals like the Holy Roman Emperor. Catherine's life was already being shaped by forces far beyond her control. As the years passed, Florence itself became more unstable. Medici rule faced growing resistance, and Catherine's position as Duchess of Urbino became increasingly contentious. The title was little more than a bargaining chip, used and discarded depending on the shifting political winds. Yet through it all, Catherine began to emerge as more than just a pawn. Her education, her poise, and her resilience caught the attention of her family and those around her. She wasn't just a tool to be wielded. She was becoming a symbol of Medici strength, a reminder of their glory days, and a promise of what they could still achieve. Her great-uncle's death in 1521 briefly left the Medicis vulnerable, but when Cardinal Giulio de' Medici rose to become Pope Clement VII, their fortunes improved once more. With him, Catherine became not just a duchess but a cherished figure in the family's plans for revival. The title of Little Duchess may have been diminutive, But Catherine was anything but. Beneath her delicate exterior, she was learning, growing, and preparing for the challenges ahead. Her time as a pawn would not last forever, and when the moment came, she would play her own game. Her journey from a fragile duchess to a force to be reckoned with was only beginning. The next moves in her life would take her far from Florence, but her Medici roots would always guide her. Stay with us as Catherine's transformation continues. The storm came in 1527, shaking the Medici dynasty to its core. Florence, a city of breathtaking beauty and boundless ambition, turned against its rulers. The Medici family had held power for nearly a century, their wealth and cunning making them the lifeblood of Renaissance Florence. But resentment had been simmering for years, and now it erupted. An anti-Medici faction, fed up with the family's dominance and emboldened by shifting alliances in Europe, seized control of the city. Florence, once their home and fortress, became a hostile battleground. The Medicis were driven out, all but one. Catherine was just 8 years old when the rebellion swept through the city. Her powerful family scattered, but she was left behind, a valuable hostage, held as a bargaining chip. Imagine her fear, surrounded by strangers who despised her family name, her very existence tied to the politics of a city in chaos. Her captors, emboldened by their victory, debated her fate. Some suggested the unthinkable, execution. Others whispered even darker ideas. But through sheer luck, or perhaps the remnants of Medici influence, Catherine survived. She was shuffled from convent to convent, her life suspended in uncertainty. Yet even in captivity, Catherine's resilience shone through. Finally, she was placed in the Santissima Annunziata delle Murate convent. There, something unexpected happened. In the quiet halls of the convent, away from the power struggles that had defined her young life, Catherine found solace. The nuns treated her not as a political pawn, but as a child, a soul in need of care and stability. For 3 years, Catherine lived among them. She prayed, learned, and grew. In their kindness, she discovered a peace she had never known. Later in life, she would call these years the happiest of her entire life. It's hard to imagine that an orphaned girl surrounded by political intrigue and threats could find happiness in such circumstances. But perhaps it was the simplicity of convent life, the quiet rituals, the absence of schemes, that gave her a rare sense of normalcy. For once, she wasn't the Medici duchess or a pawn in someone else's game. She was simply Catherine. But peace, as always in her life, was fleeting. In 1530, the Medicis, backed by the might of Emperor Charles V, reclaimed Florence. Catherine was called to Rome by Pope Clement VII, her great-uncle, who had big plans for her future. The tranquil days at Santissima Annunziata were over, and Catherine was thrust back into the heart of the storm. Her time in captivity had shaped her, though. She had learned patience, resilience, and perhaps most importantly, the value of finding peace within chaos. It was a lesson she would carry with her as she stepped into the next chapter of her extraordinary life. Stay with us as the story of Catherine's rise continues to unfold. In 1530, Catherine's life took another dramatic turn. Her time of quiet in the convent was over. Florence had fallen back into Medici hands, and Catherine was summoned to Rome by her great-uncle, Pope Clement VII. Her days of peaceful anonymity were gone. Now she was stepping into the intricate world of diplomacy and power, where her very future would be bartered and sold. To Pope Clement, Catherine was no longer just his orphaned grandniece. She was a key to alliances, a piece of the puzzle in the grand game of European politics. The Medici needed to secure their influence, and Catherine's marriage could be the perfect tool to cement relationships with powerful allies. The search for a suitable match began, and with it, Catherine's name echoed through the courts of Europe. One of the most illustrious suitors was King James V of Scotland. Young, ambitious, and eager to strengthen ties with the papacy, James sent envoys twice to Rome, bearing gifts and promises. A union between Catherine and James could have created a powerful alliance between Scotland and the Medici. But Pope Clement hesitated. Scotland, though influential, was distant and politically unstable. Clement's eyes were fixed on something closer, something grander. Enter Henry, Duke of Orléans, the second son of King Francis I of France. The Valois dynasty, rulers of France, had power, wealth, and a lineage to rival any in Europe. Though Henry was not the heir to the throne, he represented a direct connection to one of the most powerful monarchies of the time. For Clement, it was the perfect match, one that could secure the Medici's position not just in Italy but across the continent. Henry at first showed little interest. He was a brooding young man shaped by years spent as a hostage in Spain during his youth. But Catherine, with her wit and grace, began to win him over. Letters and envoys carried whispers of courtship between the two, and by early 1533, the match was set. The wedding was a grand affair. On October 28, 1533, Catherine married Henry in a ceremony filled with opulence and spectacle. The event showcased not only the union of two noble houses, but also the power and prestige of the Medici family. Guests marveled at the feasts, the dancing, the elaborate gift-giving, every detail designed to display the wealth and influence of the bride's family. For Catherine, this was the beginning of a new chapter. She had gone from an orphaned girl shuffled between convents to a Duchess of France, married into one of Europe's greatest dynasties. But life as Henry's wife would not be the fairy tale it appeared. Her husband's heart was not hers, and the challenges of being a foreign bride in the French court would soon test her in ways she could never have imagined. The stage was set, and Catherine was no longer a pawn. She was now a player in the complex game of European politics, one who would prove far more formidable than anyone anticipated. Stay with us as we explore the trials and triumphs of her life in France. Catherine de Medici's wedding day in October 1533 was nothing short of a spectacle. The streets of Marseille were alive with music, color, and celebration as she married Henry, Duke of Orléans, the second son of King Francis I of France. It was a union steeped in grandeur and politics, a marriage that symbolized the Medici family's ascent into the heart of European royalty. The ceremony itself was dazzling. The church shimmered with gold and jewels as the young bride, dressed in the finest silks and adorned with intricate embroidery, approached her groom. Around them, the most powerful figures of France and Italy gathered, their laughter and whispers echoing through the vaulted ceilings. After the vows were exchanged, the festivities began. Feasts that lasted late into the night, dancing, jousting. Every moment was designed to impress. Catherine watched as Henry, skilled and confident on horseback, jousted with the bravado of a man who already considered himself a champion. For her hand, he fought, and for the crowd, he performed. But beneath the glittering facade, Catherine's new life as Duchess of Orléans was far from perfect. While the wedding had united two powerful families, her position at the French court was precarious. She was an outsider, an Italian with no dowry after her great-uncle, Pope Clement VII, died a year later, leaving her family's financial promise unfulfilled. Whispers followed her through the gilded halls, some calling her a merchant's daughter unworthy of the Valois dynasty. Then there was Henry. Handsome, brooding, and distant, he offered little warmth to his young wife. While Catherine sought to build a bond, Henry's heart belonged elsewhere, to Diane de Poitiers, a woman 20 years his senior whose beauty and charm captivated him completely. Catherine was left to navigate her new world alone, her husband's affections reserved for another. But Catherine was not one to wallow in self-pity. She had always been clever, quick to observe, and even quicker to adapt. Despite the odds, she began to win over the French court. Her intelligence, sharp wit, and tireless effort to please earned her allies among the courtiers, particularly among the older women, who admired her determination. At court, Catherine made herself indispensable. She hosted banquets with grace, learned French customs with precision, and studied her surroundings like a strategist planning her next move. Every gesture, every smile was calculated, not out of deceit but survival. She understood that if she couldn't win her husband's heart, She needed the respect of the court. Still, the loneliness lingered. Nights spent waiting for Henry, knowing he was with Diane, must have been unbearable. Yet Catherine never faltered publicly. She played her role, not just as Henry's wife, but as a symbol of the Medici's success in France. Her strength during these early years foreshadowed the resilience that would define her life. She may have been lonely, but she was never powerless. Catherine was quietly observing, learning, and preparing for the time when she would no longer just be a dutiful wife, but a force to be reckoned with. The young Duchess was far from defeated. Her trials were only just beginning, but so too were her triumphs. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the incredible journey of Catherine de Medici. Catherine de Medici entered marriage with one clear expectation: to provide heirs for the Valois dynasty. It was her most crucial duty, the role that would define her place at the French court. But as the years passed, that expectation became a burden, and Catherine's childless state began to cast a shadow over her life. The whispers started quietly, and then grew louder. 10 years of marriage, and still no child. In a court obsessed with lineage and power, Catherine's inability to conceive was more than a personal struggle. It was a crisis for the kingdom. The Valois dynasty needed heirs, and all eyes were on her to deliver. Speculation turned cruel. Was it her fault, or was it Henry's? Rumors swirled, fueled by fear and superstition. Some accused her of being cursed. Others claimed she practiced witchcraft, dark magic that supposedly rendered her barren. Her Italian heritage and the Medici family's reputation for intrigue only added fuel to the fire. Catherine endured the humiliation in silence. Publicly, she remained composed, but privately, the pressure was immense. She turned to physicians, astrologers, and even ancient remedies. One bizarre treatment involved drinking mule's urine, a testament to her desperation. Yet nothing seemed to work. Her position grew even more precarious in 1537, when Henry's mistress, Diane de Poitiers, bore him a daughter through another woman, Philippa Ducie. The court erupted with scandal, and Catherine became the easy target for blame. Whispers of divorce began to circulate. Could she be cast aside for another wife? One who could fulfill the role she could not? But Catherine was not a woman who gave up easily. Against all odds, in 1544, after more than a decade of heartache and whispers, she finally gave birth to a son, Francis. The court rejoiced, and Catherine's position was secured for the moment. Her joy, however, was tempered by the knowledge that her duty was far from complete. The birth of one son was not enough to ensure the dynasty's survival. Determined, she gave everything she had to motherhood. Over the next decade, Catherine bore 9 more children, though not all survived infancy. Those who did would leave an indelible mark on history. Among them were future kings, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, and her daughter Margaret, whose life would be just as storied as her own. Each birth solidified Catherine's role in the court, but her struggles as a mother never truly ended. She raised her children under immense scrutiny, aware that their survival meant the survival of the Valois line. She fought for them, nurtured them, and protected them against the endless political machinations of the French court. Catherine's journey from desperation to triumph showcased her unyielding determination. She had not only secured her position, but also ensured the continuation of her family's legacy. Yet this victory came at a cost. The struggles of motherhood and the pressures of court life shaped her into the formidable figure she would later become. Her children were her lifeline, her purpose and her strength. And as we'll see, they were also the key to her eventual rise to power. Stay with us as Catherine's story unfolds into one of ambition, resilience, and ultimate survival. Catherine de Medici became Queen of France in 1547, when Henry ascended the throne, but the crown brought her little joy. As queen consort, she held the title, the jewels, and the expectations, but the true power, the affection of her husband and the center of courtly influence all belonged to another woman, Diane de Poitiers. Diane was no ordinary mistress. Elegant, charismatic, and decades older than Henry, she had been his confidant since his youth. Her hold on him was unshakable, and Catherine was powerless to compete. Diane controlled Henry's heart and, to a large extent, his court. It was Diane who dispensed favors, influenced decisions, and even signed official documents in Henry's name. Catherine, however, was no stranger to adversity. She knew better than to confront Diane openly. It would only alienate her further. Instead, she played the long game, carefully cultivating her role as a devoted mother and a dutiful queen. If she couldn't win Henry's love, she would secure her position through loyalty to the crown and the legacy of her children. At court, Catherine walked a fine line. She performed her ceremonial duties with grace and precision, attending every event, hosting grand banquets, and fostering alliances. She understood that the court was a stage, and every gesture, every word, was an opportunity to assert her presence. Yet, she never openly challenged Diane's influence, knowing that direct opposition could lead to ruin. Her strategy was subtle. Catherine focused on her children, making herself indispensable as the mother of France's heirs. With each birth, her position strengthened. She portrayed herself as the backbone of the royal family, the pillar upon which the Valois dynasty stood. Still, life in Diane's shadow was a constant humiliation. The Château de Chenonceau, a beautiful palace Catherine had long desired, was gifted to Diane by Henry. It became a symbol of Diane's dominance, and Catherine could only watch as her rival basked in the splendor that should have been hers. Even in matters of love, Diane manipulated the narrative. She encouraged Henry to spend time with Catherine, not out of kindness, but to ensure the production of more heirs. It was a calculated move, designed to secure Diane's own influence while keeping Catherine firmly in her place. Through it all, Catherine remained resilient. She observed, she learned, and she waited. The queen consort may have been overshadowed, but she was not defeated. She understood the complexities of power and knew that her time would come. Catherine's intelligence, patience, and determination were the foundations of her survival. She knew that alliances could shift, that fortunes could change. And as she quietly navigated the treacherous waters of the French court, she was preparing for the moment when she could finally step out of Diane's shadow. Her time as a sidelined queen would not last forever. The throne would soon become hers to wield, and the lessons she learned during these years would make her a force to be reckoned with. Stay with us as Catherine's journey takes a dramatic turn, leading her closer to the power she was destined to claim. The summer of 1559 was meant to be a celebration. France had just signed a treaty ending decades of war with Spain and England, and the court was alive with festivities. Jousting tournaments, Catherine knew, were her husband Henry's favorite pastime, a sport that brought him joy and showcased his strength. But joy turned to horror in an instant. Henry, wearing the colors of his mistress Diane de Poitiers, rode into the arena, bold and confident. He faced Gabriel de Lorge, the Earl of Montgomery, in what was meant to be a friendly match. But as the lances struck, disaster unfolded. Montgomery's lance shattered, a splinter driving deep into Henry's eye. The cheers of the crowd fell to a stunned silence as blood poured from the king's face. Catherine rushed to his side, her heart pounding with fear. For 10 agonizing days, Henry clung to life. Catherine refused to leave him, praying, negotiating with God, and begging the surgeons for answers. But there was no miracle. On July 10th, 1559, Henry died. Catherine's world was shattered, but grief could not paralyze her. Her husband's death left her a widow, and her 15-year-old son Francis became king. Yet the court was a battlefield of its own, filled with ambitious nobles eager to seize power from the young monarch. It was in this moment of chaos that Catherine rose, not as queen, but as the queen mother. Her transformation was swift, born of necessity. The fragile Valois dynasty now depended on her, and she embraced her role with fierce determination. She insisted on being called Queen Mother, a title that symbolized her closeness to the new king and her enduring authority. Francis was young, inexperienced, and sickly, leaving Catherine to fill the void in his rule. While others jostled for influence, she acted swiftly to consolidate power. She claimed the crown jewels from Diane de Poitiers, forcing her rival into retirement. Catherine reclaimed her position at the heart of the court, dismantling Diane's network and installing loyal allies in key positions. Her first priority was survival of her children and of the Valois dynasty. Catherine knew that France was divided by religious tensions, with Protestants and Catholics teetering on the brink of war. She sought to balance these opposing forces, adopting a policy of conciliation that frustrated extremists on both sides but preserved fragile stability. In the face of opposition, she relied on her intelligence and relentless resolve. Catherine was no longer in Henry's shadow, nor Diane's. She was at the center of the kingdom's power, a formidable figure determined to keep her sons on the throne no matter the cost. Catherine had stepped into a new role, one she would hold for decades. She was no longer just a wife or a consort. She was a mother, a protector, a queen in every sense of the word. And as her story continued, she would face challenges that would test her strength and reshape her legacy forever. The kingdom Catherine de Medici ruled as Queen Mother was a fractured one, torn between the fiery convictions of two opposing faiths. The Protestant Reformation had swept across Europe, and in France, the Huguenots, Protestant followers of Calvinism, challenged the Catholic Church's authority. What began as theological debates soon spilled into bloodshed, with families, communities, and entire cities divided along religious lines. Catherine, ever pragmatic, saw the danger looming over her son's fragile reign. She understood that this conflict wasn't just about faith, it was about power. Each faction, whether Catholic or Huguenot, sought control over the kingdom, and the young Valois kings were caught in the middle. Violence became a common language. Protestants sacked Catholic churches, destroying sacred relics and defiling altars. Catholics retaliated, often with brutal ferocity. Across France, mobs lynched perceived enemies of their faith, and rivers ran red with blood. The fragile peace Catherine had worked to maintain threatened to unravel entirely. At the heart of the Catholic faction were the Guise family, powerful nobles with unwavering devotion to their faith. Their leader, Francis, Duke of Guise, believed the only way to secure France's future was to eliminate Protestantism entirely. His policies were hardline and ruthless: persecution, suppression, and, when necessary, outright violence. To the Guises, compromise was weakness. But Catherine saw things differently. She had no illusions about the strength of religious conviction, but she believed France's survival depended on unity, not division. Her policy was one of moderation, an attempt to walk a narrow path between the two extremes. She called for tolerance, for peace, and for dialogue, a vision that infuriated hardliners on both sides. In 1560, Catherine convened the Colloquy of Poissy, bringing Catholic and Protestant leaders together to discuss their differences. It was a bold move, one that could have changed the course of history. But the talks dissolved into bitter arguments. Neither side was willing to concede. Catherine's hopes for reconciliation were dashed, leaving her to face the grim reality of a kingdom descending into chaos. The breaking point came in 1562, at the Massacre of Vassy. The Duke of Guise and his men attacked a gathering of Huguenots worshipping in a barn, slaughtering dozens and wounding many more. The massacre ignited the French Wars of Religion, a conflict that would rage for decades. Catherine, caught between loyalty to her Catholic faith and her desire for peace, tried to navigate the storm. She issued the Edict of Saint-Germain, granting limited tolerance to the Huguenots, but it only fueled Catholic outrage. The Guise faction saw her as weak, and the Huguenots doubted her sincerity. Despite her efforts, the violence continued. Armies formed, towns were besieged, and innocent lives were caught in the crossfire. Catherine's moderate stance was increasingly drowned out by the clamor of war. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast in her belief that peace was possible. She worked tirelessly to broker ceasefires, to negotiate treaties, and to bring warring factions to the table. But every truce was fragile, every agreement undone by the deep-seated hatred between the two sides. For Catherine, the religious wars were not just a crisis of faith, they were a fight for the survival of her son's throne. Her moderate stance made her enemies, but it also revealed her political acumen. She wasn't just trying to stop a war, she was trying to hold together a kingdom on the verge of collapse. As the wars dragged on, Catherine's role became increasingly complex. She wasn't just a queen mother, she was a mediator, a diplomat, and a symbol of resilience in a divided nation. Her journey through this storm would shape her legacy and test the limits of her power. By the summer of 1572, the streets of Paris buzzed with anticipation. A royal wedding was underway, a grand affair designed to bring peace to a fractured France. Catherine de Medici had orchestrated the union herself, marrying her daughter Margaret to Henry of Navarre, the Protestant leader of the Huguenots. It was a calculated gamble, a desperate attempt to bridge the divide between Catholics and Protestants. For a moment, it seemed like unity was within reach, but beneath the surface tensions simmered. Paris, a staunchly Catholic city, was no friend to the Huguenots, and the influx of Protestant nobles for the wedding set the city on edge. Rumors swirled, whispers of conspiracies, plots, and betrayals that fueled the already volatile atmosphere. Catherine, ever the strategist, worked tirelessly to keep the fragile peace intact. Then came the attack on Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the Protestant leader, and one of the most prominent figures at court. Just days after the wedding, an assassin fired a shot at Coligny as he walked home. Though he survived, wounded but alive, the event sent shockwaves through the city. Suspicion turned to panic. Who had ordered the attack? The Catholics? The Guise family? Or, as some whispered, Catherine herself? Catherine rushed to Coligny's bedside, offering reassurances and promising justice. But the damage was done. The Protestant nobles feared for their safety, and the Catholics, emboldened by the attack, grew more aggressive. The city was a powder keg and the fuse had been lit. What happened next would become one of the most infamous events in French history. On the night of August 23, 1572, St. Bartholomew's Eve, violence erupted. Catholic mobs swept through the streets of Paris, targeting Huguenots with brutal precision. Doors were broken down, families dragged into the streets, and lives ended without mercy. The Seine was choked with bodies, and the air filled with the cries of the dying. The chaos spread like wildfire, engulfing other cities and towns across France. What began as a targeted purge turned into a full-scale massacre. By the time the bloodshed ended, thousands were dead, 3,000 in Paris alone, with tens of thousands more across the country. Catherine's role in the massacre has been the subject of fierce debate ever since. Some claim she orchestrated the killings, desperate to eliminate the Protestant threat to her son's throne. Others argue she was caught off guard, her attempts to maintain control spiraling into an uncontrollable frenzy. What is certain is that Catherine met with her son, King Charles IX, on the eve of the massacre. What they discussed remains a mystery, but the king's chilling command, "Kill them all so none are left to reproach me," sealed the Huguenots' fate. To some, Catherine's actions were a cold calculation, the Machiavellian scheming of a woman determined to protect her dynasty at any cost. To others, she was a figure trapped by forces beyond her control, trying to navigate a storm that no one could contain. In the aftermath, Catherine faced a wave of condemnation. Protestant propaganda painted her as the villain, the Black Queen who had orchestrated a bloodbath. But Catherine, as always, defended her actions as necessary for the survival of the kingdom. To her, the massacre was not an act of malice, but one of desperation, a brutal response to an impossible situation. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre would haunt Catherine's legacy, casting a shadow over her life and reign. But for her, it was a grim reminder of the cost of power and the sacrifices required to hold a fractured kingdom together. Amid the turmoil of Catherine de Medici's life, one constant remained: her love for the arts. Born into the Medici family, she carried the Renaissance spirit in her blood. Florence, her birthplace, had been a cradle of creativity. And Catherine brought that same passion to France, using art and culture not only as an escape from the chaos, but as a tool to strengthen the monarchy. Catherine understood that power wasn't only about armies and alliances, it was also about image. She knew that a display of grandeur could inspire loyalty, awe, and respect. So she poured her energy into transforming France into a beacon of culture, commissioning works that would glorify the Valois dynasty. Her love for spectacle became legendary. Catherine hosted elaborate festivals that dazzled the court and impressed foreign dignitaries. These were no ordinary gatherings. They were theatrical masterpieces with carefully choreographed masks, breathtaking processions, and magnificent feasts. Each event was a blend of art, music, and drama, often inspired by themes from mythology and history. These displays weren't just entertainment. They were carefully curated symbols of Valois power and unity. Architecture, too, became a canvas for Catherine's vision. She oversaw the construction and renovation of several royal residences, leaving a lasting mark on France's landscape. Among her most famous projects was the Tuileries Palace in Paris, a sprawling estate that reflected the grandeur of Italian Renaissance architecture. Though much of the palace no longer stands, it once served as a powerful statement of Catherine's taste and ambition. Her love for Chenonceau, the exquisite chateau on the river Cher, was particularly symbolic. It had once been the gift of her late husband to Diane de Poitiers, his mistress. But after Henry's death, Catherine reclaimed it, transforming it into a jewel of Renaissance design. She added her own touches, a gallery spanning the river and lush gardens that bore her mark. It was a statement of reclamation, a declaration that this chateau now belonged to the Queen. Catherine's patronage extended to portraiture, a medium that was rising in popularity. She commissioned countless paintings of herself and her family, ensuring that the Valois legacy was immortalized in vivid detail. These portraits were not mere decorations. They were tools of propaganda, carefully curated to project strength, unity, and elegance. Her support of the arts extended beyond her personal projects. Catherine invited Italian artists, architects, and artisans to the French court, infusing the Renaissance spirit into French culture. From grand festivals to the intricate tapestries that adorned the walls of royal palaces, her influence was everywhere. Yet, despite her efforts, Catherine's cultural legacy was fleeting. Many of the structures she built were destroyed or altered over the centuries, and the festivals she organized faded into history, remembered only in fragments. But her vision, the idea that art and culture could bolster the monarchy, endured. She had turned France into a stage, with the Valois family at the center, and that image left an indelible mark on the kingdom. Catherine's devotion to the arts wasn't just about beauty, it was about power, legacy, and resilience. She used art to bring light to a dark and divided time, to unify a fractured court, and to remind the world of the greatness of her family. Even in the face of war and loss, Catherine never stopped creating. Her story is one of endurance, and her cultural contributions remain a testament to her unyielding spirit. As we continue, we'll see how her legacy unfolds in the final years of her extraordinary life. Stay with us as we explore the closing chapters of Catherine de Medici's remarkable journey. Catherine de Medici's life was marked by triumphs and tragedies, but none cut as deeply as the wounds inflicted by her own children. She had devoted her life to them, raising them to secure the Valois dynasty's future. Yet as they grew, her children became sources of betrayal, heartbreak, and political chaos. Her son Francis, Duke of Alençon and later Anjou, was perhaps her most vexing challenge. Ambitious and restless, he was never content with his role in the royal family. Catherine tried to guide him, but Francis had his own ideas. He formed alliances with Protestant leaders, even siding with the Huguenots against the crown at times. His defiance struck at the core of Catherine's efforts to balance religious factions and protect the Valois monarchy. In 1576, Francis's rebellious behavior reached a boiling point. He besieged Paris with an army, forcing Catherine to negotiate the humiliating Peace of Monsieur, which granted unprecedented concessions to the Protestants. The treaty undermined her authority and enraged Catholic leaders, further destabilizing the kingdom. For Catherine, the sting of betrayal was personal. Francis wasn't just a disobedient son. He was a threat to everything she had worked to protect. Her relationship with her youngest daughter, Margaret, brought a different kind of pain. Margaret, spirited and independent, had married Henry of Navarre as part of Catherine's grand plan to unify France's warring factions. But the marriage quickly became a disaster. Margaret, unhappy in her role as Queen Consort of Navarre, sought solace in scandalous affairs that became fodder for court gossip. Catherine's patience wore thin when Margaret abandoned her husband and returned to the French court, where she openly flaunted her lovers. The Queen Mother confronted her daughter in a fiery exchange, accusing her of bringing shame upon the family. When Margaret refused to change her ways, Catherine took drastic measures. She cut her daughter out of her will and ordered her confined, effectively exiling her from the court. The betrayals didn't end there. Catherine's carefully arranged political marriages often unraveled, with her children putting their desires above the dynasty's needs. Their infighting and defiance created dynastic crises that Catherine could barely contain. As each child pursued their ambitions, Catherine's heartbreak deepened. Francis's reckless behavior ended tragically in 1584 when he died of consumption during a disastrous campaign in the Netherlands. Though he had caused her immense pain, Catherine mourned his death deeply, writing, "I am so wretched to live long enough to see so many people die before me." Her relationship with Margaret remained fractured until the end of her life. Despite Margaret's pleas for forgiveness and financial support, Catherine held firm. The daughter she had once loved so fiercely had become a stranger, and the rift between them was never healed. Catherine's life was a constant battle to hold her family and kingdom together, but the betrayals of her children left scars that even her resilience could not erase. She had fought for their futures, only to see them undermine the very foundations she had built. The personal losses she endured shaped her final years, leaving her weary but determined to preserve what remained of the Valois dynasty. Catherine de Medici had spent her life fighting for the survival of the Valois dynasty, but one by one her sons, her kings, slipped through her fingers. It was a tragedy she could neither prevent nor endure without deep sorrow, as the weight of their deaths and the collapse of the dynasty she had protected for decades finally brought her to her own end. Her oldest son, Francis II, was the first to fall. Crowned at just 15, he was frail and sickly, a boy king unprepared for the pressures of the throne. Catherine had tried to shield him, guiding his rule with care, but he was little more than a pawn in the hands of the powerful Guise family. Barely a year into his reign, Francis died suddenly of an ear infection in 1560, leaving Catherine devastated. Her grief was private, but her resolve hardened. She would protect her remaining children no matter the cost. Her second son, Charles the Mine, inherited the throne at only 10 years old. Catherine became his regent, and for years she acted as the true ruler of France, managing a kingdom in the grip of religious wars. But Charles, though older and stronger than Francis, was haunted by the events of his reign, particularly the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which left him deeply shaken. Racked with guilt and illness, he died at 23, reportedly calling out for his mother in his final moments. Catherine's loss was immeasurable. Charles had been her closest partner in ruling, and his death left her heart and her court in turmoil. The throne passed to her third son, Henry III, who had already been crowned king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Henry was older and more experienced than his brothers, but he was also erratic and consumed by his own religious fervor. Catherine worked tirelessly to support him, though his reign brought her new challenges. The Catholic League, led by the Guise family and the Huguenots, continued their battle for control, and the kingdom remained a battlefield. Then came the greatest betrayal of all. In 1588, Henry III ordered the assassination of Henry, Duke of Guise, without consulting Catherine. The act shattered what remained of the monarchy's stability. Catherine, already ill and frail, was horrified. She reportedly lamented, "Oh, wretched man, what has he done?" Henry III's days were numbered. The Guise family and the Catholic League turned against him, and his own people began to question his legitimacy. In 1589, just months after Catherine's death, Henry was assassinated by a fanatical Catholic monk. With no surviving brothers, the Valois line came to an abrupt and bitter end. Catherine had given everything to hold the dynasty together. She had navigated political intrigue, religious wars, and personal betrayals, yet in the end, her efforts were not enough. France passed into the hands of Henry of Navarre, her son-in-law and a Protestant who converted to Catholicism to take the throne as Henry IV. The Valois family, which had ruled France for nearly 300 years, was no more. Catherine herself passed away in January 1589, just months before the collapse of her dynasty. She died at the Château de Blois, weakened by illness and burdened by the weight of her son's failures and deaths. Though she did not live to see the final fall, the writing was already on the wall. Her passing marked the end of an era. Catherine's legacy is one of fierce determination and resilience. She held her family and her kingdom together as long as she could, often sacrificing her own happiness and reputation in the process. Her story, filled with triumph and tragedy, remains a testament to her extraordinary will and unyielding spirit. The Valois dynasty may have ended with her children, but Catherine's mark on history endures, a legacy that continues to inspire debate and fascination to this day. Stay with us as we reflect on her enduring impact in the final chapter of her remarkable story. Catherine de Medici's story did not end with her death. Her legacy lives on, both as a symbol of intrigue and ambition, and as one of history's most misunderstood figures. She is remembered by many as the Black Queen, a name steeped in suspicion and shadow, evoking tales of cruelty, witchcraft, and Machiavellian scheming. But was that reputation truly deserved? Or is it a reflection of a woman who dared to wield power in an age that feared powerful women? Catherine's life was defined by survival. From her orphaned infancy in Florence to her rise as the Queen Mother of France, every choice she made was rooted in preserving the fragile Valois dynasty. Her world was one of constant turmoil, religious wars, political betrayals, and the shifting sands of alliances. She was a mother navigating a battlefield, with her son's crowns at stake. And yet history has often been unkind to her. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the most infamous event of her life, cast a long shadow over her legacy. Some blamed her for orchestrating the bloodshed, painting her as a cold, calculating ruler who would stop at nothing to secure power. Protestant propaganda fueled these perceptions, spreading stories that turned her into a villain, a manipulative foreigner who poisoned France from within. But the reality of Catherine's life is far more complex. She was, first and foremost, a mother. She fought tirelessly to protect her children and their throne, often sacrificing her own happiness and reputation in the process. She sought peace where others sought war, advocating for tolerance and unity in a kingdom torn apart by religious strife. Her conciliatory policies, though often criticized, were attempts to find balance in an unbalanced world. Her contributions to the arts and culture are another piece of her legacy, often overshadowed by the darker tales. Catherine brought the spirit of the Renaissance to France, commissioning works of art, architecture, and performances that elevated the Valois court. She used culture as a tool of diplomacy, a way to project strength and stability during turbulent times. Still, Catherine was no saint. She could be ruthless when the situation demanded it, and her decisions were not without consequences. But to define her solely by her harshest moments is to ignore the woman who stood against overwhelming odds, who held her family and her kingdom together through sheer willpower and determination. Catherine's story is one of resilience and complexity, a reminder that history is rarely black and white. The Black Queen may be a captivating figure of legend, but the real Catherine de Medici was far more nuanced. a devoted mother, a shrewd leader, and a survivor in an unforgiving world. As we reflect on her life, we are left with a question. Has history been fair to Catherine de Medici? Or has it flattened her into a caricature, ignoring the depth and humanity of her story? Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Catherine de Medici. Her legacy, like her life, is a puzzle, one that invites us to look deeper, to question, and to understand. What do you think? Was Catherine the villain history remembers, or a heroine in disguise? Share your thoughts, and until next time, keep exploring history with us.